Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 182 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I am a speaker and author of the book From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together, as well as college students together. Fun fact, I've recently started working with a district attorney general in the state of Tennessee on a diversion center for our citizens who get picked up on first-time misdemeanor drug charges. So that way they can go to treatment instead of going to jail, and then we can get them the help that they need. We can get their records expunged and get them back to work instead of clogging up the prison system. And while we mostly think of DAs as people who just prosecute cases, I will tell you that they are truly working to make our community safer while also being compassionate, understanding, and truly trying to help people in our community. So I wanted to share that, and I think it's a really good tie-in to our next guest. Cynthia Padilla-Pearson is a career victims' right advocate, I should say, and a certified trauma specialist with 12 years in court systems supporting trauma victims and developing trauma-informed programs. She has thousands of hours of experience in mediation practice, providing victim services, law enforcement training, and community-based program development. Cynthia runs Trauma and Conflict Consulting in Atlanta, Georgia. They focus on making the maximum positive effort for their community. Their members and their clients provide the momentum that helps to affect change. Using data-driven models, they provide solutions that make a long-lasting difference through planning, training, speaking, and coaching. Welcome to the show, Cynthia.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone.
It's so great to have you on the show. I am so excited to talk to you about all the great work that you're doing there in Georgia. But let's talk about your background. I think that's helpful to frame up everything else that happens afterwards. So you decided on Georgia State University for your undergraduate experience. So tell the audience, why was that the right choice for you?
Yes, Georgia State, not Southern, go Panthers. So, it's funny, I had looked at so many different programs to focus on criminal justice as my bachelor's degree. And I was living in Georgia at the time, and I was looking at some Florida schools, and then in New York, there's a criminal justice college up there. And what really struck me at Georgia State was their campus environment was very focused on diversity and instruction outside of the classroom. So at the time, there was an emphasis on social emotional learning, which was probably fairly new for a college market. I mean, this was, I guess I'll date it. So this is like in 2004. And so, they really emphasize the idea of the whole student and embracing the culture of the city of Atlanta and embedding themselves in community service work and really this extracurricular learning processes that were happening in the community. And I found that to be very unique. And that really struck for me because I'm a first generation student. So I really had no idea what to expect, but I like the concept of saying, or a framework of saying, students are a whole person. They're multidimensional, they have unique needs and interests. And Georgia State really emphasizes that.
I love that.
Yes, and they still do it. And it's interesting. They just came out with an award, and I can't remember the organization that rewarded them, or acknowledged their efforts, but they have graduated more African-American students than any private and public university combined since 2012. Wow. And so I think it just speaks volumes to how much they care about that first year experience. And of course, the retention of students. So anyway, that's my plug for Georgia State. I have such a passion for that school and certainly for the work that they do in the community as well. So if
Good for
anyone's
you.
looking.
Yeah, good for you for doing all that research and trying to find the best fit for you. I mean, my parents are from another country and they really didn't know like how to guide me at all in terms of looking for a university to go to. And so, but good for you on doing all that research. I don't even know if I would know where to start, in terms of trying to figure out where to go. Now, of course, I have tons and tons of information. So I have
Yeah.
a couple of kids. I have a junior in high school and a sophomore in high school that are now starting to do that research. And now I can give them tons of information, overload them with information about their experiences on all of these different campuses. But I think
Yeah,
it's
it was a
great.
lot of reading.
Yeah, there's a lot of reading to do. There's no question about it. And also, you were a senior victim advocate at the Fulton County DA's office for over 6 years, where you maintain an annual caseload of approximately 1,500 cases. I don't think people realize how many cases these advocates are working on. What made you want to get into this work, and what was your job there as an advocate?
Yeah. Okay. So back to Georgia State, let me tell you, they require the students to undergo a internship the last semester, either the last semester or the second to last semester before you graduate. And it was through that, again, just focus on that sort of learning in the environment that you desire to work in, is where I was able to do an internship and in victim services. And that is really where I drew on a love and a passion for victim advocacy. So in the DA's office, what you're speaking to in the introduction, prosecutors are really often seen as just the person who enforces, the violation of the law and then just kind of moves on, right? But with advocacy, we are, I like to say, like unsung heroes in that space, because we are the person that is usually the first point of contact for a victim of crime as they navigate the criminal legal system. And so what that looks like is a lot of information giving, a lot of liaison between the investigator, between the prosecutor and other court staff, and really helping the individual navigate a system that is likely unfamiliar, but is also very defendant-centered. So the needs of survivors, the needs of victims aren't always at the forefront of these conversations. Prosecutor has a job to do. And, there's a lot of investigation that happens, but there isn't much caretaking of the individual involved in the actual crime that was committed. And so 1,500 cases, annual caseload is a lot. I'm in Atlanta, so the caseload speaks to population density. It's very common that we have this many individuals that we were following their cases along and providing social work services in conjunction with that. So that was pretty hefty work. But I will say it was probably one of the most rewarding experiences because you start to realize the potential in the outcomes of individuals who've experienced such harm. And you really begin to see how integral it is to have staff and professionals, individuals in professional roles, to really highlight the ways in which we can support each other as a community. We may have these professionalized roles as I'm the attorney or I'm the investigator, or I'm the advocate, but we're people, we're part of a larger community. And we can still meet the needs of the job at hand, but also provide compassion and understanding to individuals who didn't ask to be brought into this system, right? It wasn't something that they signed up for. So I really enjoyed that work. It was very rewarding to be a part of such transformation that occurred. And I think also there was a lot of transformation in the system that is inherently broken in many ways, right? So I think through those voices of survivors and victims as they navigated that system really helped amplify the need for change and the need to support victims of crime. And that's usually not a topic that people speak about.
Yeah, I love that they have compassionate people like you working as an advocate in the DA's office, not in the public defender's office, in the DA's office, right? I mean, that is just speaks volumes. And I think that's very much in line with what I see in Tennessee here as well, that there are really compassionate people that work in the DA's office. And I think the DA's office gets a bad rap that way often in the public. And the reality is that you care, and other people in the DA's office really do care about helping people and being compassionate. So I love that. And then the other thing that I take away from that is good for you for getting that internship through Georgia State University. And I think the college students who are listening right now, hopefully you're paying attention, because those internships are incredibly important for figuring out what the future looks like for you beyond graduation. And here you have a case with Cynthia, who perfectly found exactly what she wanted to do because of that internship. And so, or maybe you go the other way. Maybe you go in the internship and go, oh, I don't want to do that, right? So you have both extremes, but it was obviously very useful for you.
Yes, experiential knowledge is so critical. I mean, like you said, I could have very well been like, this is not my cup of tea, right? But it's really interesting to be a part of a program, or to embed yourself in programs that you're unfamiliar with. That's where we really see like the growing edges of our identities and ourselves and our viewpoints of the world. And we were really fortunate enough at Georgia State to have a really robust criminal justice program where the professors and the staff had an enormous amount of field work experience. So when students would ask, hey, what should I do? Should I be a lawyer? Should I be a police officer? Should I be this or that, or corrections? There was somebody there that could say, hey, this is my experience. Let me connect you with this person, or let's sign you up for this internship for maybe just the final semester, or maybe for 2 weeks, see what you think. And what a safe way to sort of, get your feet wet, and then make a decision that is informed and one that you think you could really be satisfied with. So I really always emphasize to younger students and students entering college is look for these internships, look for these programs to really support your interest.
Great advice. Now you're doing work for the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation as their program manager. So what is this foundation all about, and what do you do there?
Yes, so AVLF is actually the largest provider of pro bono legal services in the city of Atlanta and metro area. And so there's two houses of projects within AVLF. One house specifically works with intimate partner violence or intimate partner abuse. And the other house works with individuals who are experiencing landlord-tenant disputes. So that's eviction defense, either lost wages or living conditions that need repairs, things of that nature. And it's working with low-income individuals who otherwise would not be able to have access to legal representation. So it's been around for about 42 years. And we have a courthouse-based office, one that specifically works with individuals who are seeking temporary protective orders, or in some states, they refer to them as restraining orders. And then our other courthouse office is our Housing Court Assistance Center, where individuals can get legal assistance to file eviction responses or assistance with landlord-tenant disputes. And we have on-site attorneys. So it's a really great way to create access for quality legal services. If the income doesn't support that, which we know that's really where the barrier is in seeking justice, is if you have a high power attorney or a large firm behind you, you're likely to get a better result. And so we've been really lucky to have a number of these multinational firms support us, where they also provide volunteer hours for our clients. And what I specifically do is work in the intimate partner abuse side of the house, and I manage our mobile advocacy and outreach unit. So these are social workers and attorneys and paralegals that go out into the field and really meet survivors where they are. So we have a community-based response model. The idea is that we want to bridge the gap, again, for accessibility of services. We know that it's very difficult for individuals to seek assistance when it's at a courthouse. The courthouse is very intimidating. The courthouse is usually a very dark and grimy building. So, we'd rather just go to someone's home or meet them in a location that they find to be safe and beneficial. And we go there and we provide support in whatever they need. That could mean emergency financial assistance. It could mean representation in a case, or we can prepare petitions or legal pleadings to file for them on their behalf. And we can also recommend different services or mental health services or referrals to any other agencies that provide specific resources. So that's the day-to-day operation of our mobile unit, is really just being remote access to services and highlighting the need that the community would like to be a part of a program or a service model that supports their individual needs versus us telling them just go to the courthouse and good luck, right? So that's where we fit it into the whole scheme of services in Atlanta.
Wow. Well, thank goodness for people like you and AVLF, because without you, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of these outcomes really are determined by who you have representing you. And so it's so important that people like you and AVLF exist. Otherwise, I have really bad thoughts about what could happen without proper representation. So that's so important. And you also have your own business called Trauma and Conflict Consulting LLC. So I'm wondering, who are your customers in this business that you set up, and what services do you provide?
Yeah, so it's been it's interesting that I came to this sort of segment in my life that I had seen so many programs and operations, and really the intersection of community work and civil legal systems. And I felt that there was a gap in providing a framework or a model for agencies to use that was trauma informed. And most of my customers are either prior agencies that I've worked with in either the DA's office or when I worked in Fulton County Juvenile Court. So I was working for a judge down there. And they're looking to find a way to create a service that is more compassion centered. And usually what happens is we go in, we consult with the agencies or with the groups and find out what's missing that does not provide high empathy results, or does not provide trauma-informed care, or ways in which they can be more supportive to their clientele. We also work with schools and districts. So a lot of that work is some social emotional learning frameworks and working with staff to provide trauma-informed care. So trauma responsive, trauma awareness. And a lot of that is really about how to navigate these difficult situations while understanding conflict management skills and communication skills. That's fundamentally what I found is the underlying framework by which we need to practice more. Is how do we talk to each other is really the way that we become trauma informed and trauma aware. But yeah, it's been a great amount of time working with these different agencies and groups, because it's really profound to see how their mindset shifts, where it's not just business only or like 1, 2, 3 approaches. It's how can we really be holistic, still be ourselves, but still be informed in a way that provides a quality level of service for our clients so they keep coming back.
I love that. That must be a great way to still keep in touch with all the people that you've worked with over the years. So that must be a lot of fun for you.
Yes. Yes. And, I'm working right now with the police department, and it's funny because some of the officers I remember when they were working cases like in juvenile court, and now they're, white shirt command staff. And it's pretty cool to see. And now you're like, oh, hi, Deputy Chief, but it's just great. I think it another thing that I think is really helpful when you do internships is that you learn that relationships are really fundamental, professional relationships. And when you really nurture those relationships, and you, of course, you meet expectations, you show up when you need to, and you deliver, you build trust. And it takes some time, but I think that's when you start at that point in your life to really, realize how important that is at a young age. Then when you get to later in life, you're like, oh, I got this down. I know really how to nurture a relationship and build onto that collaboration. It makes things much easier.
Yeah, you found the key to having your own business. It's all about relationships. I mean, that's it. That's it. If you can manage those relationships, you can build anything you want. And you've obviously figured it out, which is really, really great. I'm also fascinated because you regularly speak on victimology, which for all the people out there that don't understand what that is, it's really just the study of crime victims. So tell our audience about some of these theories of victimology that actually explain why some people are more likely than other people to be victims of crime.
Yeah, so, victimology, as you mentioned, the study of crime victims. And the idea was really for criminalists or criminal analysts to find out why crimes were happening in certain areas or to certain people. And so very academic based. And just to kind of put it into quick, like cliff notes, there's about 4 theories that academics really focus on when they speak about victimology. There's victim precipitation theory, lifestyle theory, deviant place theory, and routine activity. And the idea is that there's characteristics within these theories or schools of thought that either heighten the likelihood of someone becoming a victim of a crime. For instance, we see in gender-based violence that there's an idea of proximity between the person who commits the crime and the victim. So like intimate partner abuse, we see 1 in 4 women experience that. And it's the idea of the intimate partner relationship, so the proximity to that person. Or you can even think of in hate crimes that with victim precipitation theory, which is somewhat controversial for some theorists, is that we unconsciously hold or possess a characteristic that someone might find threatening, right? So you might see someone who is from one group and sees another group gaining power or momentum. This other group is going to probably commit a crime against this opposing group because of the threat of power imbalance. And with lifestyle theory, it is somewhat it sounds like is a lifestyle. So when we talk about how to be safe on campuses or in any areas that you are socialized in, is where are you in highest risk? Is going out alone at night, you're not in a group, are you more likely to experience a crime? And then of course the deviant place is that there's greater exposure to dangerous places. And so we speak about this often in our work because we also understand that there's a lot of social and economic inequalities that increase the likelihood of victimization. So if you're greater exposure to that, well, then that is likely to happen. And of course, routine activity speaks about either an absence of guardians, and guardians could be either a person or a physical characteristic like an alarm system. So an example that we often talk about is like leaving your home on vacation. You're more likely to be a victim of a crime just at that routine of leaving your home. There's your suitable target in many ways. And if there's no alarm system or there's no sign of a security system or a prevention method, that individuals might want to take advantage of that opportunity. So I say all that to, again, just reemphasize that with a lot of the work in victimology, or even in traumatology, is that really understanding the social networks that we are a part of, and also the social constructs that are imposed upon us. So it's not so much an answer to what has happened or why things are happening, but more of a way of using a theory to explain or how to prevent maybe something from happening. And that's where I always want to reemphasize is that it's not a one size fits all. And it's definitely, there's a lot of ways in which theories, as you can imagine, are contradicted over time. And that's why we want to always be aware of the biases of how these theories are presented. But it's also still a very useful tool to really impart on communities and individuals of preventative methods and how we can be more supportive of each other as a community to prevent crime as a whole.
I love it. And since we're talking about trauma, we're talking about communities and individuals alike, they can all suffer severe consequences as a result of traumatic situations. So for example, a city is recovering from a natural disaster, right? We see on the news all the shock and awe of mass flooding, loss of homes in recent natural disasters here in the United States, but we're not talking about all the counseling that needs to happen after the traumatic situation. So what are the steps that a community can take after such a traumatic situation impacts a wide scope of people in a wide area?
Yeah, this is a great question. I've always tried to bring this up some way, so I'm so glad you asked this. So we often hear about Red Cross and the Red Cross response to disaster relief and recovery, but we don't always hear about Green Cross. So Green Cross training, Green Cross certified trainers really speak to what you're talking about in assessing the aftermath of a disaster and the grief, the loss, the recovery that needs to happen. And so communities can access Green Cross training, certified trainers online. They're deployed very often in major disasters. And it was actually as a response to the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. And so the idea or the academic of traumatology is that individuals go into the community, assess the need, and work in conjunction with communities to provide services that fit their needs. And it's really about intervening on the overwhelm, the anxiety, and the adversity that comes with repair and reconstruction after a disaster or even after a major traumatic event. And again, I think in the last maybe 10, 15 years, there's been more of an emphasis on mental health in general. And so I think it's been highlighted quite often that counseling is very integral when it comes to rebuilding communities after an event like this, or an event like a disaster relief or disaster. But what's even more important is that we focus on what the community can use and what the community desires, as opposed to individuals coming in and just telling them what needs to happen. I'm very much a proponent of self-determination, which is it's a very social work terminology, but the idea of we have agency of ourselves and our thoughts and our interests, and a community does as well. And so when something happens to a community, it's the community that needs to, their voices need to be underscored and highlighted. And so what Green Cross does is really emphasize that process. So it's healing that happens. It is realizing that the solution is usually within. And they help navigate that process. But I'm so glad you asked that, because I think that, understanding how trauma impacts us, whether consciously or unconsciously, is really important in how we move after something traumatic has happened or a disaster has happened. This is the idea of how successful can we be after harm has been committed.
That's wonderful. And I'm so glad you mentioned the Green Cross. I'm sure there are people listening right now going, I didn't even know there was a Green Cross. Yeah. So you're educating, you're dropping knowledge bombs all over the place, which is great. I think for our listeners, I think it's really, really good. And, since you're talking about social workers, they have been the targets of both verbal and also physical assaults in agencies, as well as during field visits with the clients. And I'm also thinking about flight attendants that are, being harmed right now up in the skies on planes. How can a good understanding of social work protocols help social workers as well as their clients?
Yeah, I always speak about standards of care. And in social work, there's a number of standards of care, but usually in practice, they're not seen, I would say, consistently across the board. And as a social worker, having a standard of care as a professional is really important in how you navigate different agencies and different organizations. And so the emphasis is really about how can I highlight the interest of what I desire to see in my job and my role in those outcomes, and how can I promote self-care and be and still promote integrity in my position. And I think it's really important to speak of that, even in the interview process, or when you first come into a role and speaking with like a manager or, leadership, is what is your vision for yourself as somebody who is walking into spaces where individuals are seeking assistance? How can I be authentic in that role? And how can I be true to myself and my identity in the way in which I want to be seen as a social worker? Like, breaking down the actual title, how can I work in a space that is fundamentally about relationships and building trust with someone who has been impacted by something out of their control? And we, like you said, we often see a lot of individuals who experience harm or violence in the communities, or even within organizations. There's harm that is committed within the social networks of organizations. But I think that it's really paramount to focus on how you can be your own advocate, and speaking to those specific ideologies and specific frameworks by which you operate really provide a barrier or a boundary to prevent some of the harm that has happened. And of course, we always speak about documentation and managing expectations as you navigate community or house visits, and even if they're coming into your office, is managing those expectations. But that's something that is really fundamental, is that standard of care. And there's ethical principles that I think are really important to obtain and to stick by as you grow into these different positions as a social worker. That really, really helps create, like I said, that barrier to prevent harm from happening.
Very important stuff. Now, for our student listeners that are listening right now, I'm sure they experience conflict in their student organizations as well, whether it be a fraternity, sorority, whatever. And so how do we resolve conflict in our student organizations?
So as a sorority member myself, I could think about many cases of conflict that felt like they were just never ending. But I think what was missing, what I find to be really helpful, is that we need to listen more. And it sounds so simple, and it sounds so basic, like breathing, but really listening and being an empathetic listener, being an active listener, these are skills that we really don't talk about very often. And that's the part where I feel that the communication gets disrupted, is that we don't feel seen and we don't feel heard. And that listening aspect is super important, especially when you're working within an organization where you all are there together for one reason, and y'all believe in a mission, but we're all different. We have different personalities. We're different people. And so how can we unite again, or reconnect again under that same mission and value statements that we all either pledge to do, and still be ourselves? And what I did when I was an undergrad and as an alum was have listening circles. And it stems from a very indigenous model of restorative justice practices. But it's the idea that we need to sit together in a circle because we're unified. We're all members of the same organization. And we just need to hear each other out. And from listening, that re-engages our thought processes, our minds, and our perceptions of what event had happened. Or maybe there was like someone who felt misunderstood or misinterpreted something, right? And as we continue to listen, that really opens the doors for resolve. And that's where I think conflict can be not necessarily seen as a rejection, but more of an opportunity for engagement.
I love it. That's a great answer. Now, of course, our audience, they're going to want to know what sorority you're in. So I mean, you might as well tell them.
Yes. Lambda Theta Alpha Latin Sorority
Love
Incorporated.
it. Love it. Love it. Love it. That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned empathy in that answer, and I think that's something that I don't see often enough on college campuses right now, because I'm thinking about all the hazing cases that are in the media right now. I'm thinking about the sexual assault cases that literally, I mean, my mind is blown about how many of these cases are out there right now on college campuses with fraternities that should never happen in the first place. So how can we build more empathy on college campuses going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a bit about what I was speaking earlier too, and having opportunities for people to really have storytelling, right? So like these listening circles or healing circles or narration of events that have happened, and that storytelling process really builds on empathy. I think we sometimes in our own moments assume that somebody else can really sympathize with an event or then empathize with their emotion of what they've experienced, but that's not necessarily the case. You know, we all have so many different events that have happened to us. We all have so many different experiences that have shaped our response to trauma, our response to emotions, how we emote, and it's certainly what's been modeled to us as children. So, you know, one person may have an experience with something that's happened to them. Another person may have the same experience, but then feel a completely different way emotionally about that experience. So I think what's really great about having these storytelling or engaging in programs that allow for people to tell their story and provide context to you know, situations that have happened, really provide an opportunity to work on this empathetic muscle that we all have. I mean, it's we all have it. You know, we are born with being empathetic individuals. We're socialized in our mammalian brain to connect with individuals, but it's the modernized socialized practices that we tend to become more individualistic. And as we start to really lean into a more of a communal model and way of thinking, then we are able to emphasize that empathy and really lean into those ways in which we can provide connection. So I'm very much a proponent of storytelling when it's appropriate for individuals to share and they're willing to.
Yeah, that communal model, I think, is so imperative if we're going to fix these hazing problems and these sexual assault problems. We have to have this culture of care that you're describing all throughout the university. So that way, if I see somebody and something is happening to them at a party, I'm going to step in and intervene and protect that person. I mean, that's what we should be doing, is caring for one another, as opposed to thinking about only myself and going, oh, I'm going to get in trouble because I'm having a beer and I'm not 21. Like, just save a life, save somebody, do the right thing.
Right. Do the right thing. And, you know, it's like you mentioned, you know, bystanders, why we have such successful bystander intervention is because that bystander has had a visceral reaction to what they've witnessed. And that visceral reaction either came from their own experience or something similar that was a triggering response, or that they heard something via storytelling or through some narration that connected with them, and they could see themselves in that moment as well. Sort of like that I'm stepping into somebody else's shoes moment. And that's where we have to sort of bring that out more, is have these conversations about how you can intervene in moments of harm, because you have worked on this empathetic muscle, you've been thinking about it, you've heard it often, and you know the harm that and the consequences that come from the moment that you're witnessing, right? So exactly, I think that's great.
God, I hope that we can work on that empathetic muscle a little bit more on college campuses going forward.
Yes.
I am praying that that happens. Now, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And I already spoke to Stan about his recommendations for restaurants in Atlanta. So I want to know, forget about what Stan likes, what is your favorite restaurant in town?
I wonder, like, what did he say? So my favorite restaurants, so I love sushi, and there's a restaurant called MF Sushi, and wonderful plates. And Bar Taco.
Yes.
Bar Tacos, great tacos. I mean, and great drinks. I mean, you can't have a good taco without a great drink. And okay, so Slutty Vegan. Slutty Vegan is an amazing restaurant, obviously vegan.
Yeah.
And the woman who owns it really wanted to play off on some of the language and terminology, and from a feminist perspective, to draw more empowerment to the words. And she's actually blown up. I mean, I think she's now in 2 other states, but it's a homegrown restaurant that brought a lot of popularity to vegan cuisine, and it's delicious.
I love your recommendations. I think they're great. I think your recommendations are better than Stan's. So we're gonna meet for lunch or dinner, and we're gonna go and enjoy this great food. And Stan can come too. He's cool with me. So.
Sure.
So if our students listening, if they want to bring you to their college campus as a speaker, or they want to engage with you as a consultant, where should they go to connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me at traumaconflictconsulting.com. That's my website. You can click contact me there. I'm also on social media. So on Instagram, I'm at Cynthia_TCC. And then I'm also on LinkedIn as my full name, Cynthia Padilla-Pearson. But yeah, so any of the platforms that are easy access for you or that you frequently use, you can find me on all of them.
That sounds great. Cynthia, it has been so much fun today to get to know you a little bit better. I'm only in Nashville, so I could be at your place in about 4 hours. So yeah. I'm ready for sushi. You want to go to Bar Taco? We'll go to Bar Taco, and we'll make it happen soon, I promise.
Nice. Look forward to it.
That sounds great. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Cynthia, please like it. Please share it with other students on campus. And we hope to see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Bye.